everybody, it's David here having a Vital Psychedelic Conversation with Devon Christie and Emefa Boamah. Good morning, afternoon, evening. How you doing, everybody?
Good morning.
Well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so it's lunchtime in New Jersey. I've just scoffed down my lunch, and Emefa, you haven't eaten yet today. So we're talking about like integrative wellness and systems of our body and how that interacts with society and culture. And I'm just realizing, gosh, I'm rushing around so much, and we've rushed around a lot over the last month to make this recording happen. So thank you for being here. I guess first of all, tell us who you are. Maybe Devon, you are probably our record holder for most episodes on Psychedelic Today, so we're going to issue a DVD box set with your best of hits.
Wow.
So yeah, everyone knows you, but Devon, yeah, tell us, who are you today?
Who am I today? Wow, that could be a deep question. That's more of a felt experience. But if the story of who I am for people who've maybe not heard about my background and why I'm maybe a repeat guest on your podcast, my profession, I'm a medical doctor with a focused practice in chronic pain and mental health. I'm also a trauma therapist, certified in relational somatic therapy, and a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher, certified to teach that program MBSR through UC San Diego. I also am a functional medicine practitioner. So early in my medical career, I studied functional medicine, which relates a lot to our topic today. And currently, I do consulting work with Numinus Wellness, designing protocols for our clients in psychedelic therapy, as well as training programs for our therapists. And I am involved in some research too. I've been involved with MAPS for quite some time. Just wrapped a crossover study from phase 3 and really excited all the phase 3 data has been collected and getting ready for submission. And my personal research interests, as I've spoken to on the podcast before, relate to the potential for psychedelic-assisted therapy to treat chronic pain, and really looking personally with our research group at MDMA. So yeah, lots of diverse interests, but I think our conversation today is really honing in on where I'm most passionate. So I'm so excited to talk about what we're going to cover today, because it's just so much of really what has brought me to a podium, to conferences, to speak to is our topic today. So thank you for inviting both of us and for inviting me back.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, I haven't listened to your podcast yet with Pam Crisco, but yeah, it's going to be really, really awesome, I'm sure. Thanks, Devon. And Emefa, welcome to the podcast. Yeah, tell folks about you. Who are you today?
That's a really big question, like Christy, Devon said. Who am I today? I am in this moment a woman, a healer, and a guide. And at my core, I'm a medicine woman, is how I describe myself. My work in the world, I'll go with that first, is to create delicate healing spaces for women. So who have experienced trauma, so they can reclaim their body as their own, reclaim their power and their voice, and amplify for impact without burning out. A lot of my work comes from my own personal journey and the intersectionalities that I occupy, which puts me in a very unique position to have had a taste of my own medicine, and out of that abundance, be able to share it with other people. That's who I feel I am in this moment. That could change in the next 5 minutes. In terms of like how I show up in the world, what I do takes the form of life coaching. Embodiment is at the very, very core of what I do. So I'm excited to talk about that on this podcast today. I do a little bit of consulting in the business context because I have over 10 years of like working in corporate fields, organizing events. Yeah, I think that feels true to who I am today in this moment.
Thank you. Welcome, Emefa.
Okay.
We're here to talk about integrative systems, wellness, consciousness. Some people call it more kind of eclectic, natural, embodied wellness. Before we jump into that amazing conversation, because this is a Vital Psychedelic Conversation, and Devon, you're one of our lecturers, and Emefa, you're one of our students, The vital question is, what do you feel is the most vital psychedelic conversation we should be having right now as a community, as a as a society around how psychedelics are showing up?
Who would you like to answer that first?
Open.
Is that over
Yeah,
to?
it's open.
Okay, well, I'm happy to jump in on that. I've answered in different ways. I talked about ethics the last time this was posed, and I do think that's still a valid answer. Today, what's coming up is methodologies of psychedelic therapy, because there hasn't been in the literature a lot of emphasis or focus on specific methodologies of psychedelic therapy as far as modalities. And we know a lot about preparation and integration, and an understanding about the importance of inner directed or non-directive space holding that has been brought forward through maps and others before that. But I think there's more to unpack and there's more to understand around what's effective, what is most aligned, supporting, empowering people who are coming to this for their healing or for whatever brings them to this. And so I'd like to see more dialogue and more research about the processes and methodologies of the therapy that is part of that combination of psychedelic assisted therapy.
Yeah, that's really important for sure. So, not just protocols, but more just how we conceptualize and understand this experience. And I feel like what we're going to talk about helps to frame that discussion. Like, what is our definition of wellness? Emefa, what are some of your thoughts about what's really vital to be talking about?
I think with someone with my intersectionalities, equity, which is different from equality, diversity, and inclusion are the three things that I feel, or you could say access, are the things that I feel like should be part of the conversation, because there's not that many people, in my experience, there's not that many people that look like me that are in the space. And for me, that's a little bit of a privilege to have access to this and be able to use it in the way that I use it to support clients. So I think that I know there are efforts being made in terms of scholarships. And I think a major part of the conversation should also be how do we get people access to the medicine, to all of this, to the processes, the methodologies, holding space. How do we get it to them so they can participate and bring their diversity into what's happening? Because it's happening regardless of whether we want it or not. So that's the thing that's at the core of my mind. And then one more thing that's coming up is also reciprocity. So how are we doing this in a sustainable way that honors where most of these the most of these medicines, plant medicines, are coming from, right? How do we give back to the communities and not just harvest and go in and take it and bring it back? So those would be the two things that are coming up for me right now.
I love that. Thank you. And here's a reminder, as we continue to talk, I'd love to hear both of you talking around integrative communities and societies, and not just kind of me and my personal healing journey. To what extent, like, is our healing inextricably linked and integrated with our family, our community, the society, the policies that we live in? Because for me, I'm thinking, gosh, that's part of this integrative approach. So my next question is, like, what do we actually mean when we talk about integrative or holistic wellness? What does that mean if someone asks you? Maybe Devon, do you want to have a definition or just feel into that?
Yeah, well, the word integrative, I think my favorite definition of that comes from Dan Siegel, the founder of interpersonal neurobiology. And Dan talks about integration as making linkages between differentiated parts. And there's so much about our modern reductionist biomedical paradigm that's absolutely the opposite, which is about actually dissecting, separating out parts and treating them separately. You can just see that in the medical system, in the way it's divided into different specialty or subspecialties that don't talk to each other, which is a big piece of my functional medicine background, which is actually to do the opposite, to actually see a human being as an open ecosystem from a systems biology perspective, where everything is in relationship to and affecting everything else, including what's apparently outside our environment, what we take in, what our system is processing, and all of the internal systems that need to work in harmony and coherence. So in that regard, integration, this linkage of differentiated parts and bringing them together as a whole that is coherent, as a whole that is flexible, adaptable, and really, like, there's no part that is left out. And when we think about like psycho-emotional healing, so much of our parts and our self can be sort of cut out and put out of awareness, or we might even think we need to get rid of part of ourselves to heal. But actually, I see integration as the opposite of actually, understanding and communicating and welcoming back and in the process of healing to becoming whole. Yeah, it's a few thoughts
Beautiful.
about integration. Yeah.
Thanks, Devon.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, anything you're feeling into, Emefa?
I'm thinking about, I think something Devin just said about like the calling home of all the parts, right? Like the linking it together. So when I think of integration, I think of how do we make whole, right? The separation of parts. So I think the literal like different for something to work together, it needs different parts to work. So if you think of a human body, right? Like the hand cannot do what the head does, right? The mouth cannot do what the nose does, but they all work together to ensure that we work together. When I think of integrative medicine or how it 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 fits into this, it's a question of what parts of ourselves are coming into this experience with us, either as practitioners or people that we're guiding. Because my experience, I said this before, I feel like America is very mind driven. So everything is like mindset over everything. There's not a lot of, I think it's coming up now, there's not a lot of attention to the body or the heart or the spirit or energetics. So when I think of integrative and how that works, is how are we calling or how are we taking those accounts into an experience after we've had it? Because mind over matter doesn't always work in all situations, if it does at all. So that's my thought.
And Emefa, I agree wholeheartedly, and it's so interesting when we look at our healthcare systems. There's such an emphasis on physical ailments and physical cures to the exclusion of our mental, emotional health, and um, conditions that are invisible to a microscope or a stethoscope, are so often and have been stigmatized, whether that be concussions or mental health concerns, PTSD, it's a chronic pain. Whereas when we talk about mental health, it's like, as you say, like all in the head, and where's the body in that? And yeah, it's so much, I'm very, very privileged to have an elder from the Siksika Blackfeet who's shared their people's medicine wheel with me, and the medicine wheel teachings, where mind, body, emotion, our heart, and spirit each have equal place. And integration and wholeness and wellness is that all these dimensions of our being are attended to, are interconnected with one another. And I believe this is a very common understanding in many Indigenous knowledge systems that, lo and behold, are informing a lot of what we're doing in psychedelics. And that we must, acknowledge. So yeah, really resonate with your points there.
I'll piggy just a little bit on what she said. When you were talking about that, I'm remembering growing up, and I'm from Ghana originally, and just it's something that was done, just part of the culture, where if you're sick, my grandmother, before I take a pill, right, the first thing is like, oh, do we have herbs in the house that we can brew for you to drink? Do you take ginger and garlic to help with a cold, or do some kind of natural steam? So to this day, I still don't believe in taking pills. I have to be absolutely not able to walk to get the pills before I will take it. But just the acknowledgement or the awareness that it's not just one system or one thing that fixes it. And one thing I learned through a teacher of mine was she talked about like the five koshas, which is like the five bodies. So you have the physical body, which is the densest. You have the emotional body where emotions are stored. You have the energetic body, which refers to the chakra system. You have the mental body, which is where most of us exist when we're like doing something or performing. And then you have the bliss body. So when I think of an integration or spiritual body, when I think of integration from that lens, it is how are we tending to all those bodies, right, in a way that is honoring the whole of a person. Because once I do that, then when I'm speaking a language to someone, I'm not just thinking in terms of their mind and asking them, what do you think? It's also, what do you sense? What do you feel? What are you hearing? What are you tasting? But putting all that, or acknowledging all those parts into the integrative approach when healing someone or when having a healing conversation makes a lot of difference. And I probably dare say that if we take that approach, I'd be curious how that would affect the communities that we're in, right? Like the families that we're in, the communities that we're in, the country, the worlds, other universes, who knows?
Hmm.
Yeah, I do feel a very strong connection to other worlds and this kind of the concept of belonging to the universe and having this more integrative approach to life. Like, what is a human being? What is alive? What are we made of? Where do we exist? Where do we stop existing? You know, and looking up into the sky and the universe, it's like, wow, I'm never going to figure this out. And just noticing, gosh, the secular, materialistic, masculine driven culture that we've been living in for a while has made us really sick. And the medicines that we have don't really work. Like pills, maybe. Talk therapy, maybe. But we seem to need more than just pills and talk therapy. And I think integrative wellness, like what are some of the other things that people can do around integrating their systems and kind of unifying their selves into a more well space? Like, what can we do to take more charge of this?
I think Emefa and I think, are 100% aligned from previous conversations on this. But like to start out, right? We, as you say, we are so sick, and we are so disconnected from our bodies. Our bodies are carrying a lot of pain, and it's interesting. Many people are of a mind that healing might actually for them mean getting up and out of this human experience, of this embodied experience, because what's here is untenable. It's painful. It's suffering here in the body. But then contrast that to what my Blackfeet elder has taught me, which is that from their people's perspective, we are spiritual beings here in a body to have a human experience. And that the definition of a fully lived life is to live through our senses, through our bodies, every single moment, as much as we possibly can. It's just when we come into our bodies in the West, where we're as sick as we are, we find pain. But it's not to escape it, but actually to learn what are the ways that we can re-inhabit ourselves and process and heal that which is here in our bodies, which are the keeper and holder of all information, really the source of truth, the most fundamental source of truth that we have every moment of our lives is here in our bodies. So yeah, over to you, Emefa, because I know you have more to say on this.
uh, I heard someone define trauma as disruption in connection. I don't remember who to attribute that to. And when I think of it in the lens of that, the other part that I add is disruption in connection to self, disruption in connection to other. But the disruption to connection to self comes first, right? The body is the thing that we come into this world with, and the breath, and it's the thing that we leave this world with. Yet, I mean, for a lot of people, mostly we don't even realize that we're disconnected. You know, if you're not at home and someone is knocking, there's no one there. When I think of like just healing and the body and the myriad of reasons why it feels safe to disconnect from it. To answer your question about what can we do, I see the body as a home, right? Sometimes you're there, sometimes you're not, which is fair. But because of the pain that most of us experience, it makes more sense for us to get out and observe what is happening instead of inhabiting it. I think Devon and I talk about this concept of occupying yourself or inhabiting yourself. If you just close your eyes for a moment and think of it, if I occupied myself, what would it look like? What would it feel like if I was able to allow the edges of myself to get to the edges of my body? What would that look like? For some people, it will stir up a feeling of contraction or constriction because it feels unsafe. For some people, they're like, oh, I'm noticing that I can actually do this. That's one of the simple exercises. I say simple with a caveat on it because for first, there has to be a sense of safety in the body for people to come to it. And I believe that's the work that Devin and I are doing in the world, which is helping people create a sense of safety first to come back and inhabit there. And then from there, push it out, live out the rest of the world. But how can you occupy yourself through your senses and exist in this body? And then from there, other things can be added onto it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the, I think another place where we resonate is this idea of like our axis, right? Like, and that there's a vertical axis of being that we inhabit, in ourselves, and that, in my experience of it, and it's to each person to have their own experience. But in my experience, as I connect up to the a direction of above, I'm connecting to the heavens and the ancestors and the great mystery out through the crown, and as I connect down through my spine and below into the earth, which with its gravitational pull and how it holds me, I'm connecting to the life pulse of earth and like the body and that ground. And then it's like, and then that space in between, especially in the heart center, of this like integration of those two polarities. And here's where I find myself. And then like on this horizontal axis, then I relate from there, right? And then see others. And like you said, if nobody's home, right? If I'm not here in me, then I might do harm to you because I don't see or experience you as a person there, right? If I don't have that relationship first in how I understand myself and my being. And I think so much trauma and so much violence and oppression and ways we harm each other come from living from a place of being absolutely disconnected from our felt experience, Yeah.
One thing that's coming up for me as you were saying that is I have this concept that I go through life with, which is that so my heart, which is if you believe anything in chakras, is at the epicenter. It's like right in the middle of the higher chakras, which define my divinity, and the lower chakras, which define my humanity. So whenever I feel like I'm going out of self, and I notice this in people too, just being able to have words to describe what you describe as the axis, right? The vertical and the horizontal, what I describe as the being tethered to your divinity up and your humanity below through the heart. Other people have different words to describe it. And in communities too, usually when something is happening with someone, there's the tendency to like, oh, fix the symptom. But once we connect in the heart, and are able to be real with people in the world, the amount of healing that happens to the person and in community is so beautiful because, like you said, Evan, someone is home and we can recognize another human being as a human being and treat them that way.
Beautiful, beautiful. So our body is really a key part of this. We're not just talking about our brain. The body's amazing. It sounds kind of mysterious the way you two are talking about it, but that it has a magical ability to kind of show us who we are and what we need, is communicating through us. Something I want to just introduce here is a lot of us in the West don't love ourselves, don't love our bodies. It's hard for us to look at our body and to be in our body, and to be embodied. So I'm curious, why do you feel that might be so happening so much for people, and how can we work with folks around developing that more kind of positive, loving, embracing, embodied relationship with themselves?
I came from a background of anorexia, bulimia in my late teens and early 20s, where I personally experienced an absolute hatred towards my physical being, my physical body. If I walked past a storefront with glass that reflected myself to me, I would look away in disgust. And that I know what that experience is. And you know the journey for me, when I was healing my eating disorder, healing the eating behaviors was one step, and I think it was the easier step. But I knew deep down that healing my relationship to myself was going to be the way bigger mission of healing. And and that continued over a long period of time and into my relationship with ayahuasca, which was really my introduction to plant medicine work. And yeah, tying the conversation back into what psychedelic healing can bring us in relationship to ourselves and our bodies. So much was revealed through those experiences about the genesis of my so-called eating disorder, which now I would more define as my best response to circumstances at the time to manage my reality and with the resources that I had. And and so seeing the intelligence of this body mind in even giving me those responses to manage stress that was too much for me in that way. It's like I start to actually befriend and start to understand and start to really have reverence and respect for, even something that we might pathologize from a biomedical perspective as actually my innate intelligence. Like, thank goodness I saved myself that way when I did. It's horrible that it was so hard to recover from, and that so many with eating disorders, it's often lifelong. It's very difficult healing path. But yeah, I think it's learning to have understanding about the natural innate intelligence. We talk about innate healing intelligence that's here in our bodies, and when we start to really see that's actually working for us, I think that helps to shift, the perspective back towards one of starting to relate to the self differently. And it's a process over time, you know.
Yeah, it's a very long process sometimes.
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the question is self-love. How do the disconnection in the Western society when it comes to self-love? Um, my experience, or like what I see as the difference, maybe perhaps my view as an immigrant coming into the country, there's so much external expectations on how we ought to be that are being presented to people all the time. So I think it tends to make sense that when you're seeing information that is being presented to you and you don't fit into that particular model that's being presented, something tends to happen where, of course, you're like, well, I don't fit into this thing. So how can I love myself? What does it look like to love a person like me? And between that and the disconnection that we feel from our bodies and our intuitive intelligence and inner healer, I see it as it's almost like inevitable that people don't really love themselves. Um, and I start with self acceptance, which is probably much bigger than self love. It's just the recognition that I am who I am. And that is enough. To get to that point is a process. It takes a lot of work personally. It takes a lot of work with people in community. And I will add to Devon's experience where I have done a lot of healing. I find people who have done a lot of healing, but something happens with medicine, with plant medicine of some kind, psychedelics. For me, it was mushrooms that just takes you out of it, and you see the inherent worth of who you are as a human, as a person, and integrating that process after coming out, I think does a lot to help with self-love. Not to say that it cannot be attained without psychedelics, but there's a different quality to it when you're able to see yourself outside of yourself and see
Yeah,
that you're just valuable as you are, and that helps you to tend
exactly.
the relationship with yourself.
And that you don't need to do anything to be worthy to
Yeah.
exist either, right? Like your existence, by definition, you exist, therefore you are valuable to existence.
Hmm.
And I'm studying IFS right now, which I think is a really beautiful heuristic and model, and I'm in a group with psychedelic practitioners studying together, and we talk a lot about how psychedelics can actually really dismantle some of our protector parts quite quickly, right? Like just almost like just brush them away, as opposed to needing to work with those protectors and get their permission, and which I could see my eating disorder as a strong protector, for example, right? And because it is trying to protect the system. It's a very compassionate view that even the protectors that are acting in ways that might be seen as contrary to our well-being are making their best attempt, right, to try and keep the system stable. But then psychedelics just brush them away. And then what's left in the IFS heuristic, is the capital S self. Or just, we might just say our essence, our innate qualities of being that are there all the time, but just have become covered over by all these other layers of responding to challenging circumstances over time. And so then what do we discover? We discover love, we discover compassion, we discover all these different qualities, curiosity and creativity,
Funny.
and and but then the thing is, when the psychedelic experience is over, sometimes all of those protectors can come right back in. So important to the preparation and integration of those experiences, right? So that we don't discount them, which protector parts would do. They'd be like, that wasn't true, yeah, buy into my story again, for your own for your own benefit. Yeah. Yeah.
And I would like to add something, Dave. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge a few things. One, for someone that looks like me, there is real danger out in the world where there is actual information that is targeted at making us not love ourselves. So to not only are we fighting against us as human beings, like whatever's happening internally, there's also the societal expectations of how we ought to be. So when I say that looks like myself, Black woman, queer, able-bodied, or some disability, whatever it is, there's all these things where society is bent on making sure that we don't feel comfortable in our bodies. So
Yeah.
for me, from that lens, self-love is an act of reclamation. It's like a defiant political act to reclaim who we are as people and stand in that inherent worth without buying into what we're being told to do. So it felt really
Unapologetically.
unapologetic. Just like own
Yeah.
it, that
Yeah.
this is who we are, this is where we come from, and we get to take space. And that is an
Yes.
act of political
Yes.
warfare. So
And the solidarity in that I feel connected with you in is being in a woman's body, and having queer orientation, though that doesn't necessarily show in how I present. However, in a woman's body, in a masculine patriarchal Western society, the ways of relating and knowing and orienting that are deeply here in the fabric of my feminine being, that have not been valued and have been even discounted or pushed down, which includes our emotional embodied experience, mind over body, body as heathen, body as, that's even, not only does that support, labeling women as hysterical historically,
Emotional.
and even going so far as to, hysterectomies to cure this hysterical condition, and other ways that our bodies have been oppressed and taken over through these systems. It's also, being, like you say, pitted against each other, like women to be in competition with each other for the praise or affection of men, for example, right? Like to keep each other down. And, I studied Kundalini yoga, which, in this system, it's like we lift each other up. The orientation, especially woman to woman, is this like, let me celebrate your gifts and your talents, sister. Like, yes, which, as you say, it's like an act of defiance and something that's so important right now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing
Thank
that.
you for that.
Oh, I love, as we're talking, we're all taking deep breaths and using our hands and bodies to express that I amness. I am is beautiful, and where we can all be the I am and help each other to be there. Feels like that's what we're trying to do, and what psychedelics are leading us towards, that a deeper relationship with self and other. And that, I think, part of what you're saying, Emefa, that otherness, like, so there's like, we can be others compared to like the norms of society, the majority, whatever is normal. I think everything's normal. But then we also have parts of us that are others, parts of us, our shadow, systems of ourselves that we're just not connected to. And I want to throw something out there that lately I've been thinking about the commonly used term in psychedelic research of neuroplasticity. It gets a lot of attention. It makes a lot of sense. It is real and it's really important. But I feel like it's getting too much of the attention, or it's not all of the experience, it's not all of the process. And so what I feel like we could say instead of neuroplasticity might be kind of essence plasticity, or systems plasticity, or universal plasticity. So it's not just neuro, because what we're going through ultimately when we use psychedelics is we're getting this really powerful experience of perhaps, going through ancient trauma that we carry. We're reconnecting with transpersonal, unconscious, archetypal energies. That it can be really hard to work through that, but that's the plasticity that we're talking about, like our sense of self and reality, and our ability to kind of still do our same job. And the way we look at our society and our culture can change. So it's actually making how we see reality different, like it's reality plasticity as well. So how do we prepare people for what might happen? And, really wanting in a careful way to say, this could be a very transpersonal kind of universal plasticity experience that we're going to go through. How do we prepare them for what might happen as they start to use psychedelics for healing and wellness?
I think part of preparation, I mean, it's a bit of a paradox preparing for psychedelic experiences, right? Especially through like a lens of informed consent or something, because you can't know what a person's experience will be. You can't tell them that ahead of time. But I think, that what you bring forward is, this potential for a lot of disruption, disruption to the status quo of maybe how I've related to myself or the world, or to spirit, or that I might even consider there's spirit to relate to, like a total shift in worldview, this plasticity that's so like we can think of it globally. I think it's important to, highlight the possibility to people. Like what you're saying yes to is something that may be disruptive to your experience and the experience you've known up to this point. And your mindset coming in and the intentions that you hold are going to help to direct that experience to some degree, but it doesn't control it. And I think that, that there's neuroplasticity, and there's also, from the neuroscientific research of psychedelics, also, Robin Carhart-Harris theory of relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, right? Where psychedelics on the level of what we're seeing in brain activity is relaxing what he calls heavily weighted priors, right? Which we might translate as our firmly fixed beliefs, identities, ways of thinking, and habits of perception that have been reinforced over time through confirmation bias. All of a sudden, those are loosened. And then we're actually opened up to so many new dimensions of experience that we are closed off to, the constraining force of the existence of, like, what he calls canalization, or like those strongly reinforced habits. They restrict what we can attend to, right? They restrict our perception. So when they're loosened, and now under psychedelic, we've got all these dimensions of experience that we can suddenly experience. That's where I think, not only in preparation, but in how we meet and attend to the emergent experience of people in psychedelic experiences as practitioners, is we need to be fluent ourselves in our own dimensions of experience of our being, so that we can meet and be curious and inquire and help that person to come to know themselves in all of that dimensionality, and then for their meaning to percolate up from that place. So, and then to help in the integration of that.
That is beautifully said. What's coming up for me and I use analogies a lot, is I think of, like, when you're taking someone through the preparation for an experience, as in setting intentions which are different from expectations, because every single person's experience is different. So I give this analogy of, like, intention is sending you into a neighborhood to pick a place to stay. Expectation is giving you a specific address and telling you that this is where you're going to stay. Now, if you give someone an area where they get to pick where they get to go, people pick places that they're like, oh, I would like to stay here. But at least you give them which area they're going to be in. During preparation, I think one of the things that's important to um, express or get people ready for the plasticity you're talking about in different levels. And then it's coming up for me what we talked about, the mental, the physical, the emotional, spiritual, right? Some people go in and have a completely bodily experience and it can get overwhelming for them and they tap out. Some people get a transpersonal experience. It's just laying out to them that these are the possibilities that you could have, or you could have none of them. And that in itself, after the integration, after the experience, is what we bring into the integration process. So I think of it as mostly setting people up with as much information as they need, also trusting that their inner healer is going to do the work during the process. And during it, I love what Devon said about having your own, being fluent in your own language, knowing how are you tracking what's happening within you. How can you know where you end and the other person begins, but not in a very, like, wall way, but a permeable way where you can actually go in and help them, or you can not help them, support them and hold the space for them. But how do you know what your responses are during the preparation? What comes up for you in relation to the person, and during the experience itself and integration? My guiding principle is, how do you know where you end and where the other person begins in all those three stages, but not from a place of, like, cutting connection, but trusting that they have what they need to go through the experience.
Mm-hmm. And that embodied self-awareness, which allows us to be, like, the fullest, most present we can be, is here fully in our bodies, aware of our nervous systems, aware of what's arising in our inner sight and vision, and emotionally, like, we're able to track all these dimensions, but it's rooted, grounded here in the body, knowing if we're becoming agitated, knowing how to bring ourselves back to ground, knowing that our body itself is like an instrument in that setting where a person is wide open beyond just the words we say, like really taking in all the ways that we're relating on all those levels. And so for us to know where we are and what we're communicating into that space, so important, like you say. And I think the body into the integration phase too, around like this potential of disruption and real shifts, people can come out of psychedelic experiences a little confused, right? Or like, I had this vision, but was it true? Am I to interpret this literally? And this is where I think we can really rely on the body as a source of truth and wisdom in the moment, and help people inquire into, okay, if you remember that vision, what's present for you now? Are there any tensions anywhere? and just like, again, bringing it right back to here now and going into one's own experience and facilitating that process to find that truth in themselves through the body. And I think that's such an important thing, to support agency and empower others in their own truths, as opposed to maybe having a mental conversation, or even thinking in my mind, how would I analyze this, and then giving that analysis to them, right? I think there's subtle or not so subtle harms that can come out of that.
Which brings to mind Courtney's session yesterday,
Yeah,
Courtney
Courtney
Watson's
Watson.
session, about which ties beautifully into your session too, Devon, about what are the subconscious things that we are bringing into the space as people that are leading these people through the preparation during the experience, and how aware are we of them influencing their experience, right? And the other side of it also is, how aware are we of their things that they're bringing into the session, whether we identify with them or not? Like, what are the similarities? What are the differences? How do we tend to those, right? And essentially, harm reduction, how do we, at the core of it is what we're trying to do, right? It's just to hold the space for the person in a way that they can have their journey. And if they reach out for help, we're there to support them. But how can we do that if we're not stable within ourselves?
And something that is really important as a skill for our students at Psychedelics Day and in Vital is that lived experience. So yeah, master's degrees and credentials and licenses are great. They cost a lot of money, and please God, we can pay the student loans back. But gosh, there's something important about just being a real human being and being connected to what that feels like. And I've started to realize that training practitioners to be ethical and competent, a lot of that is simply about helping them connect with being a good human being, and that there's not much difference between just being a good practitioner and being a good human, like in a sense, just good in the sense of loving oneself and being connected to all those parts. And the experiential piece of training is really key for us. So I wanted to mildly pivot, Emefa, and ask you a question about your Vital retreat. You went to Costa Rica and you did breath work there, and I think there was some CrossFit and dance and fire ceremonies, and there's videos on YouTube if anyone wants to see. Emefa's covered a few times. It's go check it out. But it's a beautiful video, and it looked like you had an amazing time. I wish I was there. I have massive FOMO. What was that like to do that as a training piece, like to become a practitioner, but also just as a person, as a woman, for your own healing, your own experience of going through those 5 days together, and of sitting for another student for their breathwork session. So how's that all kind of tied to what we're sharing here?
There's so many emotions coming up for me when I think about that experience. First, I loved the practicum piece. I loved the fact that we got to do like a practical part, which was like a requirement, perhaps a little more expensive than I planned for. But but the experience of having people that you've been talking to for a while that you hadn't met in person, and to be there, and this felt like a very special one for me because there was no actual psychedelics involved, but the effects were the same. So this experience, which ties to the answer I was answering before, to be able to sit for someone for 3 hours, just think about it. One of the students, Sherry, said at the end that if we took this out to the world and just spend 3 hours uninterrupted with our loved ones and our friends, how different will their lives be, right? So to breathe for 3 hours and have the honor of sitting for another person 3 hours was a lesson in just knowing where I end and where I begin, and that just because people have different experiences when they're breathing doesn't mean my interpretation of the experience might not be the actual experience that they're having. So that was like a big learning one for me. I loved the way the program was set up. I think Kyle and Joanna did a fantastic job. And yes, you should have FOMO. It was incredible. Between the embodiment practices of working out in the morning and yoga and dance, and it was such a beautiful way to integrate some of the things that came up. For me personally, and this is probably where the tears come in, it's that experience was probably single-handedly the most healing experience I've had in all my lifetimes, because in the end, and this is where community care comes in, which I think is a very, very huge part of psychedelics, or like integration in general. But to have been taught to the end, there's a practice that they have where they lift someone up, and the entire group lifts them up. And I got to live on my medicine womanhood. I led the fire ceremony. I had my headgear turned. I'm sure my grandmother was like, "Ah, look at you doing this in America." So that was like a moment for me. And after that, to just allow myself to be held, to lay on the mat and have 23 people hold every edge of the mat and lift me up, was just, I hope every single person has that experience. Now, for me, I don't want to go. I'll go into another time. I'll go into like how the actual experience, but what is signified for me in the Vital Psychedelics community, which I appreciate and I would toot my horn. It's probably part of the reason why I'm coming out about psychedelics and feeling like it's an aligned thing, because I know the power of community. I know the power of leaning into community. I know the power of giving in community. And I love that psychedelics today added that piece to the student's experience, because you get to not just like take in information, but you get to practice it as well. And it's influenced my breathwork practice since coming back, because it's like a core part of how I serve my clients now, to get them out of their head into their bodies, and part of their prep before they take medicine, especially for the people that have never done it before, because they get a taste of it and they're like, whoa, all I did was breathe. Yes, all you did was breathe. So that was my personal experience, and I'm deeply grateful to psychedelics today for that.
Wow, amazing. Thank you, Emefa. That sounds incredible. I'm really happy that you had that experience and that moment with 23 people holding you up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how we all need to feel, and to
Yes.
kind of trust them and feel safe in that. And maybe Devon, if I can ask you a question that I alluded to earlier, I remembered integrating self with society and community.
Hmm.
So that,
Yeah.
just understanding as we go deeper into ourselves, our systems, who we are, how we identify. How does that work with what you've seen with psychedelics and people that are doing a healing journey, of how they integrate their relationship with others, family, relationships, society, culture, the meaning and their identity around that?
Mhm. It's interesting. Often people, if they have, psychedelic visions, or visuals, often, these fractal patterns can show up. And, when you asked me the question, that's what I saw in my mind's eye, was this fractal, right? Because if you drill down to even the workings inside a cell, a single cell, and all the parts in that cell that keep that cell whole and healthy, and how they need to work together, and then in a healthy human, like the way all our cells in our body and our organ systems need to work together. It's like health as an emergent property comes when there's connection, when there's coherence in that connection, supportive connection. So if we see ourselves as part of a larger body, of our families and our communities and humanity and the planet and all the other species and all beings, it's like, how are we, or are we not, living relationships of support and mutuality and coherence? And that's, I think, where that sort of it spills into that. And I think people might have psychedelic experiences where they see the truth of this, or feel it in some way, yet come back into a broken family system, or a society with no sense of community, and that can be absolutely jarring, and devastating, right? To recognize this is the reality of how we're living together as humans right now. No wonder we're sick. So I think this is just part of how we need to, in this community and all our communities, really value community and what it brings and the health it brings. I have a Buddhist community I meet with monthly. They just came to my house 2 nights ago, and we contemplated together for 2 hours, and oh my gosh, and then shared the merit of that to all beings, right? Because it's just this prayer. Like there's a lot of people not aware and really asleep and really cut off from themselves and living in sort of the way society is feeding us the way to live. And I also come back to prayer myself a lot, that we can find our way back to the natural way, to like Emefa, that vision of you in the fire ceremony, and you're like, oh, even now it's bringing chills to me, right? Because I just like the wisdom of ceremony, community ceremony, dance, music, like that brings connection, that brings rhythm. And one nervous system by itself in the face of trauma is very vulnerable. Many nervous systems together in the face of trauma, there's resiliency, right? And so yeah, I just see it all connected that way. And thankfully, in many ways, psychedelics help us to perceive this, and then in each person perceive what's the truth for me in this. Yeah. And then we can try to live that.
Amen.
Beautifully said.
Amen.
Yes.
Let's talk maybe some handy tips, hacks for life to become more integrative beings, to make it easier to live in our bodies and to feel well and to love ourselves and accept ourselves. And something I'm happy to share. I've been using CBD for a couple of months now. Big thanks to my friend in Colorado for sending that. It's a little tincture, a drop in the morning, drop in the evening, just CBD, nothing else. And over the course of a few months, I've really felt it took me through quite a challenging couple of weeks where I felt like I was close to breakdown a little bit and just working through quite a lot of stuff and almost kind of spiritual emergence coming through. It was making me slow down, and it was helping me to slow down, but also making me slow down, and just become a bit more aware of what am I doing, a bit more aware of other people, a bit more present for other people. And so I've really noticed how that's affecting me and helping me to integrate my parts and my systems and self and other. So for me, that's that's helping me the last few months. And my other piece is probably dancing. So you mentioned that, both of you, dance. Gosh, that's amazing, because I think we get out of our heads. It's hard to let go because we're in our heads. I can't dance. But then once we start it, boy, it's hard to stop because our bodies are dancing. They're free from my brain. So my body loves to dance because it gets to have fun. So those are my kind of little hacks to help me be a more integrative being.
I there's a lot of giggles coming through when you were talking about like dancing and like, oh, get out of my head, and then you watch the body all take over and it just like moves. I say the body will body if you let it, right? It's like, okay, just let it have its space to move. Sharing that space with you. Practical tips. Um, Movement is a big piece for me, and that could look like different things at different times. It could look like weight training, it could look like cardio, it could look like dancing, it could look like taking a walk. But it's a huge part when it could look literally like shaking when there's a lot of emotions that I'm experiencing that I don't know what to do with. I just like, I don't shut my head up completely, but I just like tend to the body and be like, what do you need? How do you need to express what is showing up right now? Because I don't have the words to describe what's happening. So how would you like to express it? So that's one of the ways that I ask the question. And it could come out like that. Sometimes it's screaming, sometimes it's pillow fights with my couch. But there's always some kind of like movement with energy that I do with my body. And you can do that in the safety of your home. No one is watching. And just see how it feels like before you take it out into groups with people. I also have a women's ecstatic dance community here where we meet once a month. And that's just, you just go lights out, dimmed. No one is watching anyone and you get to just move. So movement is a big part of what I do. The thing that I've come to, I'm integrating now in my thing, is rest. So when people hear rest, a lot of people think sleep, but they're not the same thing. For me, sometimes I get rest from meditating. I get rest from just like sitting still and not doing anything. I'm listening to this book, Rest is Resistance. I forget who the author is, but she's the founder of the NAP ministry. And she redefined rest for me as most of us think of rest to give us more time or space to go and do, right? Whereas rest is just a thing it's who you be. That's why we're human beings and not human doings. So rest for me is a way of like, it's also a process of reclamation for me. Like, this is how my ancestors came and toiled and fought. I get to rest because I want to rest. And one of the ways that helps me slow down is microdosing, actually. So that's like one of the tools that I use too. Because what it does is what you were saying, Dave, I find that I operate here. There's a frequency that I operate here, which is usually like has staccato movement. It's like very short frequencies and just like moving fast. When I microdose, I find that I'm a little slower. So the spaces between the dips is much wider and I'm not as fast. So then I'm able to be present with people. I'm able to be present with my body. And it just makes for a better interaction for people with me. I'm nicer. So those are the two tips. If people don't have access to mushrooms to microdose, then movement is one of the easiest accessible, and rest. I would highly encourage slowing down if that's an option for you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Emefa. And there's also functional mushrooms as well that you can just buy
Yes.
online. Lion's mane reishi. So I use those ones as well. Devon, sorry to interrupt you there.
No, fine. I agree wholeheartedly with what both of you have spoken to. There's plant medicines that can assist us, movement, play, embodiment, all of that. So, so important. So, what else comes to mind for me? Well, one of them is really just being conscious of the attitudes that I'm operating from. And I think one attitude that's really important for me is curiosity, like really just staying curious, right? Because I think curiosity supports this approach that's really flexible, that I don't like, that myself is a self in process, and that I'm, meeting experience and learning as I go and as I grow, and then the other attitude is humility, right? Because I think it comes from a lot of the conceptual understandings that I've integrated, including understanding, what fires together, wires together, and what shapes and informs our perceptual biases and how we view life and what we believe, and that we can actually become quite rigid or fixated in certain ways of perceiving, and we have a negativity bias also tied into our survival biology. So we're more likely to look at what's wrong than to attend to what isn't, right? And this continues to shape our reality, and our reality informs who we are and who we understand that we are. So this humility piece for me, that comes from understanding like the ways of our biology and the ways of like how we can default to like threat avoidance and all of this, and that the ways I see are not necessarily true at all. They're shaped historically. The humility piece keeps me on the path. Like it keeps me on a path. It keeps me devoted, because if that's everything I'm kind of like working with, then it takes intention and effort to keep walking forward in a way with curiosity and discovery to, as you say, discover what it is for me to be a good human, and to be as human as I can be in the short time that I have here, in relationship to myself and to everyone and everything. So those attitudes are really important. And what's been also helpful for me is I have a coach that I see 90 minutes weekly for over two, maybe coming up on 3 years. And that accountability is really helpful. Having the conversations I have with her each week, where I'm clarifying my values and how much I'm living into those. Just this morning before this podcast, we had our meeting, and one of the things I had come to this past week was like, I am not willing to sacrifice my health for you could fill in the blank, right? But it was coming from that, and then even shifted that to I am devoted and committed. I even wrote it down here. My first priority is to love, value, and care for myself in body, mind, and soul first. And it's like, but having a coach helps me reinforce and continue to live these things as I continue discovering who I am as an integrated human being. So, and what truth is. I think truth is a real compass for me, and truth is a subjective thing that's emerging as I live. And so also like asking this question, like what's true is also really helpful for me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Devon. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Accountability, such a powerful
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah.
And I did have one question, Devon, maybe just to help listeners that want to start off with a deepening relationship with their body. There's this concept of embodied inquiry. And we do talk about it in Vital. I think you spoke about it in your class, and we don't teach, body work. We're not Hakomi or somatic experiencing. We do teach around touch. And I think, we can talk about that maybe just before we wrap up. Touch is really, really important as part of this. What's embodied inquiry? And do you have any kind of expressions that you use to guide people into some embodied inquiry themselves?
Yeah. So embodied inquiry, it's a methodology that, for me is a synthesis of my many backgrounds I listed at the beginning, both in somatics and mindful inquiry. And it's a synthesis, particularly as it pertains to accompanying and being with people in non-ordinary states before, during, after, as a methodology that, in my experience, can be leaned into at any point, that's upholding that person and discovering their own truth, that's non-directive, that's inner-directed. So an example is, I talked about dimensions of experience, right? So in somatic experiencing there and other somatic approaches, there's often like an acronym to sort of list out dimensions of experience so you can remember them and remember to inquire. So one of them is SIBAM, so sensations, images, behaviors, which is like impulses, gestures. Often psychedelics open up. People might do mudras spontaneously. They might suddenly get this like, or you might just notice a tensing or a movement. And as the person accompanying, if it's appropriate in the moment to gently point it out, maybe invite more expression of that, to bring it more into expression. So behaviors, impulses, affect is like our emotional experience as one of the dimensions that, when you tell me about that image you see, I'm curious if there's emotion present, right? And then meaning is kind of what comes out, that percolates up from this sort of bottom up process of really fleshing out with curiosity. Again, there's that attitude, right? Genuine curiosity and wonder in this other human's experience and in the operation of innate healing intelligence happening as I do my best to curate optimal conditions. And I think embodied inquiry is one of those ways to support optimal conditions to help people relate in their experience to those different dimensions, and to name it, to make it explicit, to bring it into the relational field. There's so much healing that happens there too. So it's curiosity, questioning, using invitational language, which is not to say like you're not directing anything. It's that people are always at choice when we're using embodied inquiry. So yeah, and what it supports when you dig down into the literature is actually psychological flexibility and uh, actually shifting from experiential avoidance, which also psychedelics help us do, to opening to our experience, even if it's challenging. And so, and we know that this is a factor in wellness, right? When we can turn towards experience, when we can have flexibility in our response, and then choose, ultimately choose according to what we value in our life, how we respond, having choice, being response able, as opposed to the constraint of wounds and trauma and fixed ways of relating that are defenses and constrain what options we have. And we often are reacting as opposed to responding. So I think, yeah, the method is to support all of that and support that through psychedelic assisted healing and practice.
Oh, right. Yeah, I love it. I love the curiosity keeps coming up. I know that's a big thing in
Hmm.
IFS, and that being a psychonaut, as a part-time profession, yeah, we are going within our own universes, exploring the infinitude, and yeah, there's no map. So it's really, really amazing to go into that place of awe and wonderment. And Emefa, I think the way you described your experience in Costa Rica, that was really kind of going into that place that kind of connected all those parts of you. I wanted to ask for you, Emefa, because you speak a lot about embodiment. That's probably your number one word. Um, what other things coming up for you? Just finally, about what does embodiment mean? How do you talk about it and help your clients around that?
Mm. There are two ways that I look at it. One is the physical inhabiting of your body. So that's why we talk about like creating the safety within your body to actually come into it. And then there's also like embodiment evolved, which is how do you inhabit a value, a quality, a feature part of yourself, right? So people come in and I work with clients where they have, first when they come in, it's like, I feel like I'm very disconnected from who I am. I don't know how to get back to this person. And then they get back to the person, we work together. Once they're fully present in the body, and we do work around their core values and their desires, their goals and their dreams, then this place becomes not enough. That's like, okay, now I have this with me that I use a lot, the snow globe,
Oh,
which
snow globe.
is yeah. So usually when they come to me, they're like, too much is happening. I can't see what's in the snow globe. So our first part of the work is settling this in the snow globe. And then once we can see what's in the snow globe, then most of their desires is how do I get there? Right. So a lot of the work, the second part of the work, which is like embodiment involved, is how do you become the person that you want to be to get to where you want to get to be? And for some people that are in like the second act of their lives, this part is okay for them because they've done all the things that they've done in the past, and all they want to do is enjoy who they are for who they are. So it's a literal coming back into the body, getting clear about what you want to do, who you want to be, and then having choice, whether you want to move further, whether another part of you want to inhabit. And then we gently, playfully work our way towards becoming that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and recognizing that like the body is the base, it's the foundation, right? Like what's most of our embodied experience is unconscious moment to moment, but it's directing what we're conscious of, whether whether we want it to or
Oh,
not,
no.
right? So bringing embodied awareness into conscious experience, to me, it just creates so much more choice and so much more awareness about who we are and who we are being and what's influencing our perspectives and how we're meeting experience. And I think, after a psychedelic experience too, which can be, as we've talked about, so transcendental and so spiritual in many ways, maybe not even embodied, in the experience itself, but it's like you come out of the experience and then what? Here we are in the body, that's sensing, feeling, breathing, living. So how do we anchor those transcendental experience into our lived embodied experience? Because that's where they become real and
Yes.
lived, right? One of my teachers, Sharon Stanley, says spiritual experience that is disembodied is like smoke from a chimney, right? Like it's just how do we embody those transcendental experiences and then live them? And I think that's where like embodied inquiry and other embodiment methods in the integration phase can be so valuable to anchor what people
Mhm.
want to anchor from those experiences.
As you're speaking, I don't know if anyone has seen, I'm such a movie nerd. Doctor Strange, both one and two.
Yeah.
There's a part of the thing where like the master like touches him and he goes through this whole experience where he becomes completely disembodied, right? And he goes through all these planes, all these changes into all these things. And then he comes back and then he says, whoa, how do I become that person? Right. And the rest of the movie is him becoming that version of himself that he saw. That's one of the ways that I look at like the psychedelic experience, right? You meet this person that can maybe not a master, but then you have an experience and then this whole disembodiment process happens and then you come back and you're like, okay, what from this experience do I want to bring into my physical reality, and how do I be that which I saw, right? It's the just echoing what you said. I just had a movie
Absolutely. Love it. I love all your analogies, and I love the snow globe too. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good. I saw that film as well. It was trippy. You know, it was really out there. Wow, and I love that we're talking about, you know, psychedelics. We love talking about them, but they just play quite a small role in this. Like, they open us up. They have this universal plasticity. They give us that kind of touching on our head, this amazing experience. But that's not our reality yet. So it gives us a taste of that. And then what do we do to get there? And some people, they're like, oh, I just want to get back to that space. So they'll go and do ayahuasca next weekend as well. That's not the work. You know, they might think, oh yeah, that's it. I did it. I felt ego death, and I'm, you know, that's not it either. It's like, no, to actually get to be that person.
Or finally, I got up and out of this horrible experience. I want to stay there. Like, how do I stay out of it in the transcendental? But it's not the reality.
Yeah, the reality
We're still in the
not yet.
We got a lot of work to do, and it's lovely. This embodiment, it gives us that map to do the work, because our body is the map. It's communicating and messaging with love what to do next. So, speaking of love, I've loved this conversation. Loved it. Thank you.
We both had the heart.
I know. I love it.
Thank you. This is an incredible opportunity. Yes, and I feel honored to be able to share my voice and my experiences, to have whatever fate happened to, well, it's not fate, I know it's the universe. I was like, here you go, ding, and just put me in the path of psychedelics today. To think of where I am a year out from now is such, thank you for the work that you guys are doing in the world. And I'm glad that I get to weave a little part of it. So deep gratitude to you.
Likewise, deep gratitude to you too. And thank you, David, for inviting this conversation. So important, so meaningful.
Yeah. No, thank you, Emefa, and thanks, Devon. I hope we can do this again. There's much more to talk about, but yeah, I think we did it justice here. All right, folks. So before we sign off, just tell people, if they want to hear more about you or kind of read about you online, where would they go? Emefa.
Okay, on Facebook and LinkedIn, Emefa Boamah, and the spelling will be there. On Instagram, which is where I usually share a lot of my work, the practical part of my work is Emefa_embodiment_coach. And my website is emefaboamah.com. Easy. So yes, I'm looking forward to sharing more about what I do. And if you're on there, send me a message, send me how you connect. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer and support.
And I just want to say to Emefa's family out there, I hope you enjoy listening to this, because she's been an amazing student and human being, and we've learned a lot with you. So thanks to your family for being part of your journey and your ancestors as well, Emefa.
May I respond?
Yeah.
And I'm probably going to say this in my dialect, Oyuwaladon Akel Nawo, which is from all the people whose shoulders that I'm standing on. Say thank you for recognizing that and acknowledging that.
Thank you. Thank you, Emefa. Beautiful. All right. So, Devon, where would you like to tell people they can find you for more information about the work you're doing?
Thanks. So I would say the best place to go would be to my Instagram profile at Dr. Devon Christie, and I respond to direct messages, so feel free to reach out to me there. My website is drdevonchrustie.com. And I'm teaching in Vital. I teach with Numinus. I teach in a number of different organizations, and I'm working on actually releasing a sort of condensed teaching on another platform. So stay tuned for that. Really focused in embodied inquiry as a method, and so I'm looking forward to sharing that with others.
Oh, yeah. Tell us as soon as you can. Tell us the detail. That sounds amazing.
Will do.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to this. Emefa, Devon, wow. Thank you for your work and your amazing wisdom. God bless everyone.